If Allah guarantees sustenance, why do people starve to death? We often encounter the following objection. The Quran says that the sustenance of every living thing on the earth belongs to Allah. In other words, Allah guarantees the sustenance of every living thing. But if you look at the statistics, it's reported that every 4 seconds, a person dies of hunger. About 20,000 people die of hunger every day, and nearly 8 million people die of hunger every year. Is this statement of the Quran invalid? Let us examine this question in detail in the light of reason, observation, and the Quran. Does the God really provide for the sustenance of every living thing as the Quran says? And if so, why do people seem to starve? Before turning to relevant verses, it would be useful to take a look at the order in the universe. We see that a bird flying in the sky, a worm crawling under the earth, a fish in the depths of the sea, a baby in the womb. Even microscopic creatures have their own food system. Some of them are gigantic and require tons of food a day, while others survive on microliters. Each of them receive its foods in a timely manner and according to its needs. In such a great order, it's obvious that there is a power that provides the food for every living being without error. Even this observation shows that we need to look at the matter more deeply and carefully. In the Quran, Surah Hud, verse 6 states, "There's not a living creature that walks on the earth, whose sustenance does not belong to Allah." This verse clearly states that the sustenance of every living creature is guaranteed by Allah. However, there is an important distinction. In clarifying this issue, Bediüzzaman Said Nursi states that there are two main dimensions of sustenance. One is essential sustenance, which is the minimum food necessary for a living being to sustain its life. The other is non-essential sustenance. That is, sustenance based on taste, habit, and luxury. According to Bediüzzaman, the food for which Allah guarantees, mentioned in the Quran, is only the food necessary to sustain life. The other type of sustenance, which include comfort, variety, and excess, are left to human effort and will. In other words, Allah guarantees the basic sustenance that every living being needs to survive, but not luxuries. Bediüzzaman gives a remarkable answer to this question. Allah's guarantee of food is real. People don't die from lack of food, but from other causes. He explains the reason as follows. Allah created the human body in such a way that part of the food ingested is stored in the body as fat or glycogen. Even if a person is deprived of external food for a period of time, he or she can survive on these internal reserves. There are many medical cases that support this biological fact. For example, 2 children who swallowed chemicals at a young age and damaged their esophagus lived without food for a long period of time under the supervision of doctors. One of these children survived for 75 days and the other for 90 days without eating anything. Or some Muslim scholars and many people of other religions, such as Buddhist monks, are known to have practiced long periods of starvation for the purpose of self-education, in addition to the suitability of our biological structure for this. Such examples show that humans have a biological defense system against prolonged starvation. Then, why do people die of hunger? Bediüzzaman also explained this question. Most of the time, people die of diseases caused by the sudden abandonment of bad eating habits they have acquired throughout their lives. In other words, the cause of death is not starvation, but the body breaking with its habitual order. This is analogous to many examples we know from everyday life. Drug addicts fall into a coma when they suddenly stop smoking. Heavy workers retire and become ill when they become inactive. People today are used to eating 3 meals a day and filling their stomachs with a variety of foods. If this pattern is suddenly disrupted, the body may not be able to cope and human system collapses. Ibn Khaldun approaches this issue from a similar perspective, saying, in times of famine, those who are accustomed to eating a lot suffer much more than those who are accustomed to eating little. It's not the famine that kills them, but the station to which they are accustomed. This perspective shows that the cause of death is often the disruption of eating patterns. What can be said when a person who has been accustomed or forced to eat little all his life also dies of hunger? The most important factor to consider here is man's cruelty. Allah has created food for every living thing. However, people can prevent this food from reaching others. This situation can be illustrated as follows. Allah has created enough air for every living being to breathe. But if a person strangles another person and prevents him from breathing, that person dies not because there is no air, but because the air is cut off. Similarly, Allah has created enough sustenance for every living being. But if people usurp this sustenance, or distribute it unjustly, or make it inaccessible, then a person dies not because he has no sustenance, but because his sustenance is denied him. And such a person will be rewarded in the hereafter in the sight of Allah for the hardship and the patience he has endured in this world. The regions with the highest rates of hunger in the world today are also the richest terms of underground and surface resources. This shows that the cause of hunger is not a lack of production, but a disorder of distribution and exploitation. More than half of the world's resources are in the hand of just 1% of the world's population. On the one hand, people are dying of hunger. On the other hand, people are dying of obesity. This distortion is not due to God's justice, but to man's failure to use the justice available to him. In other words, the problem is not the divine justice, but human injustice. In conclusion, first, according to the Qur'an, food is under the obligation of Allah. Second, this obligation is only for the food necessary to sustain life. Third, many people die of hunger because they don't have access to their food, either because of diseases caused by the disruption of the body's natural order or because of injustice by people. Fourth, God's food is denied because of human injustice, and people suffer as a result. Fifth, the oppressed who are denied access to their sustenance will be rewarded for their patience in the hereafter.